I think the hardest thing to do and the most important thing to do in actively responding to the death of a loved one is to work from loving in presence to loving in separation.
What up, Vibers? Welcome back to the Vibe with Kai podcast, the place where we keep it real about mental health and neurodivergence and the messy, beautiful journey of being human. I'm your host, Kairos Keenan Westcott. Before we get deep today, and trust me, we are going to get deep today, I have to give a massive shout out to our presenting sponsor, Sucre Bay. If you've been following me for a while, you know that I am obsessed with storytelling, and Sucre Bay literally puts stories in a bottle. We actually collaborated on a brand new scent that is near and dear to my heart. It's called Why Did I Walk Into This Room? It smells like warm cherry pie and cinnamon. It is comforting, it is sweet, and honestly, it is a gender-neutral love letter to the ADHD community. It captures that feeling of chaos mixed with self-acceptance perfectly. You need to check them out at sucrebay.com and find a story that speaks to you. Okay, now today's episode is special. We are talking about something that we all face but rarely know how to navigate. Grief. My guest is Thomas Attig. He is a applied philosopher and revolutionary voice in grief studies. His new book, Seeking Wisdom in Death's Shadows, changes the game on how we look at loss. We talk about why letting go is actually bad advice and how to move from passive sadness to active grieving. Also, I gotta tell you about what happened during the interview. Like I do with all my guests, we did a special segment called Reverse the Mic where I let Tom put me in the hot seat. And I gotta tell you, he asked me some incredibly personal questions about my own experiences with loss that I have never shared publicly before. Now, that segment is not in this episode. It is exclusively for my subscriber family on Patreon and Facebook. For just $5 a month, not only do you get that exclusive hot seat reverse the mic moments, but you also unlock my entire ADHD deep dive video library. Those are deep, detailed videos that actually help you understand your brain, stuff that I don't normally post on social. So if you want the full experience, join the family. The link is in the show notes. But right now, my friends, take a big, deep breath. Give yourself some grace. Here's my conversation with Thomas Attig. My friend, welcome. Thank you for hanging out with me today.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, man. I have to start in a very specific place here because my audience is full of people who love to research things, right? And you are what they call an applied philosopher, right?
Yeah.
So to the layperson, philosophy can sometimes feel like people sitting in a room just thinking big thoughts that, about life and, all that kind of stuff. But you focus on the applied part, which I love. Can you explain what that means in the context of real, messy human grief? And how do you take philosophy off the chalkboard and then bring it into the living room?
Philosophy started in ancient Greece, according to some, and it was basically older men walking in gardens, talking to one another about what's life, what's it about, how do we live it well, what are the challenges that are the hardest to deal with. And they were together searching for wisdom about facing the hardest challenges that life gives to us.
Mhm.
And I would offer as a definition of applied philosophy um, a search for wisdom in the hard places. And I think there are lots of hard places and lots of reasons for people getting their minds together on addressing what doesn't have easy solutions. There are challenges in life that I would call problems, and
Mhm.
problems can be managed, solved, overcome, finished with, and so on. And mysteries are challenges that we can't control, we can't manipulate, we can't make them go away. Things like being smaller than we'd like to be, being impermanent and having to die one day, being uncertain when we desperately want certainty. Um, Life is a mystery, love is a mystery, suffering is a mystery. We can't make these things go away. We have to figure out how to live with them. And death and dying, is an area where it's permeated with mysteries. Our loves have just been seriously impacted. Death is on the scene, grief is on the scene, suffering is on the scene, and these aren't problems that you just solve and move on to the next one. You learn how to live, you adapt how you are living, given that these things are in your face.
Right.
And you can be sure that down the road they'll present a different face. They
Right.
will not go away. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and it's interesting the way that you were framing it because it actually goes hand in hand with what your new collection, which is called "Seeking Wisdom in Death's Shadow." Um, now, I love that title, and it goes hand in hand with what you were just talking about because I feel like a lot of people I think try to run towards the light immediately because the dark is scary, right? You were talking about the mystery of things. Why did you choose to focus on the shadows of it? What's hiding in the dark that you think we actually need to see?
Well, yeah, that's it. We need to see it, and we need to engage with it. Um, I was thinking about that title again just the other day, and um, shadows are there. They make a difference. They hide some things. They shape the light that comes to us. Um, they're real, and we have to contend with them. But I think a problem with them is, or a key feature of shadows is they're not the end of the story. They're not decisive. They change the living in their presence. They obscure things that we wish were easier to see. They prompt us to ask questions. What's further down the road? Where are we going? What else are we going to meet with? Are we going to meet with this thing a bit more full force than we seem to be meeting it now because we're thinking about it, say that's a shadow. Uh, Eventually, shadows prevail, but most of the time, we live in shadows perfectly well, and we learn how to do it.
You speak so eloquently about this, right? And like I know this comes from years of insight and experiences, and you received a lifetime achievement award for your work in death education, which is incredible. But I'm curious about your personal evolution. Like, if you could go back to when you started your PhD program at Bowling Green back in, I think it was 87, right?
Oh,
Yeah. If you could go back and talk to that version of you, what would you say about grief that you've learned since that point?
I would say you want to take me back to another point. 1987, my colleagues and I founded a department of philosophy that was
Mhm,
going to deal with applied philosophy. And I had been teaching about death and dying since 1974.
mhm.
So I was maturely into sort of what I do now. What got me started? Um, I grew up in a family where my mother was one of 9 and my father was one of 10.
Oh,
And
wow.
on each side, they all married except for one. So I had more than 30 aunts and uncles in my
Oh
life.
my gosh.
And my father was 18 years older than my mother. So the people on his side of the family, he was almost, well, he was about 50 when I was born. All right. The
Mhm,
people on his side of the family started dying while I was a child. And transportation wasn't all that easy at that time. So letters would come in about cousin so and so had died, somebody had died on the farm, somebody had been in a car accident, and so on. And my mother, for some reason, didn't think this was just for the adults. So when I was 3 or 4, people started dying, and a letter would come in, sometimes quite lengthy, and she would read the letters. And I became acquainted with things that children don't usually become acquainted with. And when some of her sisters and relatives and so on started dying, um, while they were ill, she would take me to the hospital, and we would spend several hours together in a room with a dying person. And it just I thought this was happening in every household everywhere. I
Sure.
just became acquainted with death and dying. We had rumors in our house, and one guy lived upstairs with us for a while. He was a college student, and eventually he graduated and left. And his first job was working at a funeral home. And one night he was called to an accident that had taken place by a railroad track in town, and he was the first person to see his fiancee having
Oh,
been killed by the railroad train. And he came and spent some time with us and talked with us, and we went to the funeral. I was always taken to funerals. I was always taken to witness and see things. I became accustomed to things that people ordinarily apparently don't become accustomed. I did not think I wanted to study death and dying. I went into philosophy. Seeking wisdom seemed like a good idea. I wanted to teach, so I wanted to have conversations in my classroom rather than teaching people mathematical formulas and trying to force trigonometry down high school students' throats when they didn't care.
mhm,
So I thought if I'm teaching history or literature or philosophy, we'll have good conversations. I admired my teachers most. My older brother was a teacher, and I wound up in philosophy. In graduate school, my father died about the second year that I was there. I drove home for the funeral, and I drove back to the graduate department where I was studying, and I thought, it would be nice to have a wise man to talk with about this. I'm not overly distressed and so on, but that would be just sweet and ideal. And all the way down there, I couldn't think of a single one of my professors who would be the kind of a philosopher I could sit with and have that kind of a conversation. And I vowed to myself, not thinking that I was ever going to teach about death and dying, I vowed to myself that I want to be the kind of philosopher that you want to talk to, that you want to come into the room and just have a real heart to heart conversation. I went off to Bowling Green State University where they were beginning to teach applied courses. They had a new college that featured programs in nursing, gerontology, social work. And it seemed to me that a lot of students in those programs were going to be afraid to go into a room where someone's dying or someone's grieving. And that's going to be their responsibility. I can teach a course, I think, and we can talk together about these experiences, why it's so difficult to look at them, and the benefits of talking heart to heart. And it turned out I was really good at that. So
mhm,
I started. Well, this is what really got me into writing. I had my students write journal entries about what they took to be the three most important loss experiences they'd had in their lives. They didn't have to be about death, but most of them were. And none of them talked about going through five stages, a la Kubler-Ross. They
mhm.
talked about what am I going to do with the stuff in the closet that's left behind? How am I going to talk to grandma, given that my father, her son, just died? I don't know what to say. Um, they talked about having to, I fed back to them, how do I live in this world with all this stuff that's left behind, the physical surroundings? How do I walk down that street? How do I sit in that pew in a church? How do I have this conversation, that conversation? How do I parent my children who have now lost their mother, uh, and so on? And I said, what you're telling me is that grieving involves relearning how to live in the world. And they all went, that's it, sir. And
Mhm.
it's different because we're all in the world in different ways. And that's my core idea that I sort of began my writings about. And it's been a big hit.
Yeah, it definitely has, and actually, I want to dive in to the feeling of grief because I've seen you I've seen you say that uh death takes our breath away, right?
Mm.
And I think that people with anxiety and high sensitivity really feel that somatically. Like it's
Oh,
not
yeah.
just sad thoughts, it's physical as well.
You can
Why
hardly move.
Yeah, so why? Why do we feel grief in our bodies so intensely? Does understanding that physical reaction will it help us, I guess, stop panicking when it does happen? Like why do we feel it so hard?
Well, if so many aspects of your world have been affected and your way of being in the world are affected, it's only natural to feel like this is more than I can handle. Uh, just
Mhm.
a couple of weeks ago, a cousin, one of my wife's cousins, who was about 70, um, died suddenly. He was putting up Christmas decorations and fell dead on the grass out in the front of
Wow.
his house. And someone told her that had happened, and she said, "What? What? John? What?" And then she said to me, my cousin John just died." I said, "What?" I did what she did. I mean, the same
Yeah.
thing. What? What? It was just, it's so much to take in all at once because our lives weave into one another. We're not these isolated little atoms floating in space that are self-contained and self-adequate in all kinds of ways. We're we're like a web of connections to all things in the world and to all other people in the world. And it can feel like the whole web is being torn when someone dies. And it turns out that it isn't, but it can feel that way because so many little surprises are in it. Things that you hadn't even anticipated thinking about come to mind, or things that you wish you could think about become inaccessible. I mean,
Mhm.
and it's just a profound disorientation that takes your breath away. But you've been learning how to live in the web of all things connected to all things
Mm.
since you were born. What you have to do in relearning how to live in the world is more of what you've been doing in learning how to live in the world in the first place. You're made to do this kind of thing, but you are knocked off your supports. You realize that you're more dependent on others than you ever thought you were, and you don't know how to approach them, and feeling helpless and feeling that you have no control over anything, only natural. And part of the deal and what's happening there is in day-to-day life, for the most part, we live in terms of our egos making decisions about problems that can be solved, and navigating through day-to-day life and making small choices, and so on. And then this comes along and it hits you in a deeper part of who you are. And I think egos are great for solving everyday problems and making everyday decisions. And the 5-stage model of grieving is all about ego defenses. If
Mhm.
you're an ego and you want to be in control of things and keep moving ahead, if something gets in the way that looks like it's too large, deny that it's there. Go on, pretend that it's not there. That doesn't work when it's death. It's there.
Yeah.
Um, Anger. Our egos try to control things by getting angry and puffing up and trying to manipulate what you can't manipulate, and bargaining. Well, if I can negotiate my way into a better place to be living and so on, I'll be all right. And that doesn't work. So then you feel depression. Uh, Pardon my French. Oh, crap. These defenses don't work. All right. And then you get to acceptance. And people say this is the end of grieving. Acceptance is this is the reality. That's the only possible place to begin something else entirely that you have to do. So
I love
five
the
stages are out of the way. So what is it about you other than your ego that enables you to do things? I think everybody in the world can recognize that we all have within us capacities to care, to love, to ground ourselves, um, to form communities and friendships and relationships. Um, that helps. And there are spirits within us that want to experience joy and adventure, but when the going gets tough, um, we struggle to overcome suffering. We struggle to rise above. We struggle to find hope that sort of pulls us in the direction that's positive. And I think it's our souls and spirits that do the reweaving of our lives, and they have done that in the first place. Does that make
hearing
sense?
it does, and hearing the way that you talk about that, it reminds me of something that you talk about often. You talk about the difference between what happens to us and how we respond, right? Like you say that grief isn't just a state that we enter, it's something that we do. If you don't mind, can you break down the difference between passive sadness and active greeting? Because I think a lot of us feel like we're just victims of our emotions. So what's the difference between passive sadness and active grieving?
It's what's passive and what's active.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right, right. Typically, the focus through the literature up until, frankly, some of my writings started taking hold, um, the focus in thinking about grieving was what happens to us, the sorrow or the hurt or the complication that comes into our lives. What happens, what happens, what happens. Those 5 stages are supposed to be things that happen to us in grieving. Some people talk about symptoms coming over us and they want to think of grieving as an illness. I think that's inappropriate. In an illness, a lot of your success in getting over that is other people treating you and doing for you and doing to you. And in grieving, active grieving, you have to do yourself some very hard things. And I was I was recognizing in the writings of some people when in about 1990 or so, I wrote an article on the importance of conceiving of grieving as active. And it's about what you do, and it's about what you hope to get done, and it's about uh, not only what you do, but what you do with people who care about you or people who are suffering the same hurt. Together, maybe we can figure out how to be a family with 3 children, one of whom is dead, and we can and we can move on. Um, and it's in that active engagement that there's hope and there's progress and there's engagement in living not unlike what it's been before someone died. It's familiar territory. It's just that we need time to kind of pause and take it in and begin to think carefully ourselves and with others about what's the hardest stuff we've got here, what's some of the easiest stuff. Let's mix it up so it's not all the hard stuff all at once. Let's
Right,
get our
right.
feet and feel like we're making some progress. Let's talk with others about how they think we're doing. Find those wise people who can give us some feedback of, uh, you need some more time to just sit with yourself, or it would be really good to sit here with me or somebody you're more comfortable with and just talk about that experience of all this coming over you all at once and be loving to yourself. If you would give somebody else some time to deal with this, give yourself some time to deal with it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if the hardest stuff doesn't come easy for you doing it alone, but you do better with a really good friend or an adult or a sister, um, sign them up.
Yeah.
Ask them if they're willing to stick with you. One of the hardest things about grieving is the people you were counting on sometimes the ones who won't even talk to you about it.
Mhm.
And sometimes you're really surprised by who comes through and helps you make it.
Yeah.
And there are great disappointments in that. Some friendships are lost, and some relationships in families are really bumped hard by he can't even he won't let me tell my favorite story about so and so. Let me tell you just a quick story. I had
Mhm.
a couple come in speak to my class, and they had a 3-year-old young girl and a 1 year younger brother. Um, and the girl fell off the swing in the backyard and wound up in the hospital. And over the weekend, she died. And it turned out that she had a hidden illness in her brain that was about to burst forth. And all it took was that hit to knock her for a loop. Some people disappointed her. Uh, After the weekend, they had a funeral. And the pastor said, congratulations, as she was going into the church. And she said, congratulations, what do you mean? You have an angel in heaven. She said, if I had had the will, I would have punched his lights out.
I would
Right,
imagine so.
right, right there. And then she told me about the person who was the most helpful. She had a neighbor. The 3-year-old daughters played together. The neighbor called her up that next week and said, you know, our daughters played together quite a bit. We got to know each other a little bit, but I'd like to know you more. Um, I've got photos of them playing. How would you like to come over? And we'll go through the photos together over a cup of tea. She said it was the best thing I ever did. And she was an unexpected help, but it was not hard for her to talk with me about the most difficult experience I'd ever had in my life. And she recognized that a big thing about what I wanted was to continue loving my daughter. I didn't want to leave her out of things or imagine her off somewhere else. I wanted the part of her that's still with me to be out in the open. Are these things helpful?
It is because I feel as though there's a lot of people that are listening who are probably terrified that moving on means forgetting the person, right? Because I think that society, and you could correct me if I'm wrong here, and I believe this is a myth that society like tells us that grief means closure and letting go, but you use the phrase love in separation, right? Which I love. So like for a person that is terrified of of thinking that moving on means forgetting a person, can you explain why you feel letting go is actually bad advice if you do? And also, what would you say to somebody that has that fear in the first place?
I think society has an inclination to visit that view on people who are grieving. Um, I think the hardest thing to do and the most important thing to do in actively responding to the death of a loved one is to work from loving in presence to loving in separation. When you get there, you're in a very hopeful place and a richly rewarding place. How do you do it? It's, oh, you can't do that if you haven't got around. I point out, I usually have audiences that are larger than one, but I can ask you,
Yeah,
did you bring
absolutely.
everyone that you love who's alive with you today into the studio?
No, no, I did
No.
not.
Did you stop loving them when you left them?
Not at all. Still love them.
Do you think they stopped loving you when you came to the studio?
Not at all. They're probably
How
very
could
proud
you
of it.
love them right now while you're apart? Well, you could tell me about them.
Hmm.
You might tell me a story, you might laugh with them. You could tell me about the advice that they gave you. You could tell me about the best experiences you've had with them. You could tell me about you couldn't possibly be the person you are today if it weren't for something that they did or something that they said or something that they encouraged. We're experts at loving people while we're separate from them. The only thing is we can't do what requires their physical presence. But you're not sitting there loving and holding hands with all the people you love, even when you're present with them. All right?
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
so I say you can get to a point where you can remember, you can appreciate legacies, you can identify legacies. What did he teach you to do? What did she teach you to do? So you're better at doing the dishes or cleaning the roof or driving the car or taking care of the kids or whatever. Um, you can appreciate legacies of soul. They made you a more caring person in some way, a more loving person. They taught you how to love children. You were pretty good at adults and friends, but now you've got a child in your life for the first time. How do you love this little thing that can't talk back? You know?
Mhm.
She taught
Mhm.
me a lot about that. Um,
Yeah.
and you've got legacies of spirit. You learn from this guy how to try harder when the going gets harder, how to stick with it. You learned um, how to worship. You've learned how to um, learn from mistakes and try harder the next time, and so on and so on. If you can get past the pain of missing their physical presence, which is no small thing, that's a big thing, and start appreciating what you still have, the best gifts they've ever given you, aside from their physical presence, you still have. What you got to do is find them and hold on to them and live in
Yeah.
part in terms of them. What could be a better outcome than to sort of wind up not with a life that's closed off from contact with or appreciation of this person, but that's open to and embracing how you're different for having known them. If you can get to gratitude past the pain, I think you've done the best you can do in grieving.
Mhm. Absolutely. It's I always view I always wanted to have a conversation about this, especially from a neurodivergent perspective, right? Because a lot of my platform uh, talks about things such as ADHD, right? So like have ADHD inattentive type. A lot of my audience is learning to manage ADHD and generalized anxiety disorder, depression, OCD, all of these things.
Good for
And
them.
so for yeah, and we're naming it, and we're going through this journey together, and it's really cool to have a group of people doing that. But with that said, I feel like a lot of us, even as we manage our neurodivergency, we have this brain fog that just naturally comes, right? But grief, I feel like, adds an extra layer of fog. So for the neurodivergent people that are watching or listening, how how can we distinguish between my brain is struggling because of my chemistry
Mhm.
and my brain is struggling because I'm grieving? And do we handle them separately?
My guess is we handle them separately.
Yeah.
And I think most people who have such conditions are in the hands of caregivers, family members or professionals or good friends or whoever you happen to have met. I mean, often they wind up in professional care, but
Mhm.
often they're in the hands of loving family members and friends, and realizing that leaning on those supportive people at a time like in serious grief, you lose your sister, your dad's killed,
Mhm.
and so on. Um, if you just have this little inner monitor that says, "This is one of those times when those people are good for me, I got to be with them." All right.
Mhm.
Now, that means that those people have to have an understanding of what's going on with grief. And if they're thinking about 5 stages, that's not the good person you want to connect with. You
Mhm.
want to connect with someone who has somewhat of an understanding like mine.
Mhm.
And I think people who understand these things are better able to be supportive and
Mhm.
would be readier to make suggestions about why don't we try this?
Right.
why don't you tell me about the best conversation you ever had with your dad or with your kid? Why don't we together maybe make a meal that reminds you of mom? And then we can just talk about mom there and see if
Mhm.
that helps. Things
Yeah.
like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. The other side of it for my audience, so we talk about the neurodivergency side. We also have a big introvert community, and within our community, we have a persona, I guess I'll call it, called the over empathic sponge, right? And these are and these are introverts who absorb everyone else's emotions.
Yeah,
So
so they grieve everybody else's grief, right?
absolutely. We exactly, like, when a death happens, like, things like family dynamics can go crazy because an introvert, will absorb everybody else's emotions. So, introvert or not, how can somebody just protect their peace and grieve authentically without getting crushed by the emotions of everybody else in the room?
I've got a certain understanding of emotions. Maybe this helps. Maybe it doesn't.
Mhm,
Okay. Uh, a lot of people think of emotions as these um, crushing intrusions that absorb all of your energy and all of your thought, and all of your focus. Um, and I think in the culture in general, as they think about emotions, they incline to think that what you need to do with your emotions is express them, get them out. So what you have in these people's experience is a feeling like they've got to pour out the emotions of everybody in the room with whom they are identifying and so on. And I think if you can help them to understand that the emotions to get hold of are the emotions that are your emotions, because I don't think emotions need to be expressed nearly as much as they need to be understood. And I think emotions are the equivalent, the emotional equivalent of uh, physical symptoms. Physical
mhm.
symptoms like a pain here or a leak there or whatever are telling you something about what your body needs. And if you think of your emotions as telling you about something you need, um, better connection with so and so, companionship, I can't stand to be alone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you can help them focus on what are you feeling as opposed to the stuff you're allowing to take hold of you, uh, you might get somewhere.
Yeah.
But I have to confess that I haven't ever been in the room, I don't think, with someone who is the garbage sponge that you talk
Yes.
about. And I can imagine it, and it
Yeah,
would feel just crushing and overwhelming.
yeah,
But why are you expressing his emotions? What you need to do is be focusing on yours and what it's telling you about what you need in your relationship, what you need in feeding your body or taking care of your sleep pattern or whatever it is that's trouble in your life. And if you can take care of some of that, well, if it's your hobby or your calling to feel everybody else's feelings, well, let it come. But for now, let's try to get around that too broad focus. Help them focus. Does that make
yeah,
sense?
absolutely. It does make sense. It's funny when as I was getting ready and prepping for this interview not too long ago, I was reminded of something that bothers me whenever the conversation of death comes around. Uh, I cannot stand when people say things like everything happens for a reason or at least they're not suffering, that kind of stuff. Which and I know that people say it with kindness and like there's no malicious intent there.
No, but it hurts.
Is that normal? Is it normal for somebody to feel that way when they hear things like that and they're going through a grieving process? And like, is that common, or am I just alone on that one?
Well, the priest who said, "Congratulations, you've got this child in heaven." Uh,
Hmm.
it's as if the people who say these things are trying to persuade themselves that the pain that they're not facing in themselves really isn't there. They're distracting themselves. They're deflecting. Um, I think if I were in the room with such a person, I'd say, "Tell me about what you're feeling,
Mhm.
not what you think other people are feeling." I
Mhm.
think I try to get the focus there. Um, God, they say all the dumbest things. Well, uh, look, I've been thinking about myself a lot. I've gotten
Yeah.
a little bit older. Part of the book is sort of retracing 50 years of my thinking about this stuff
Yeah.
and how I've grown up in various ways. I think gratitude is good, and I think forgiveness is good, and self-forgiveness is also a good thing. We all do, I think, unforgivable things, um, clumsy things, and hurtful things. And I think when we grow up, if we learn to be more forgiving, we probably live in more forgivable ways, and those are good ways to live. And
Mhm.
if we find ways of being grateful and moving our attention away from the stuff that we just wish weren't happening, we probably can act more constructively and be more emotionally effective with one another in our interactions. I must say that in a topic that we're not going to talk about in detail, there's a lot going on in the U.S. these days, sources not really unknown that are making for intense emotional upheaval and making it harder for people to focus on the real personal grief when it comes. Because it's like I've been feeling unhappy all day, every day, because everything's
Mhm.
falling apart all at once.
Mhm.
And I think we become less effective as uh, individual grievers in the life circumstances where we are at home. And unfortunately, feelings of powerlessness and helplessness are pretty damn common these days.
Oh, yeah,
Uh,
and it
it's
makes me
not
think
what
of, like,
context in which
like,
they
an
grieve.
identity crisis. It makes me think of, like, we go through, like, this, like, identity crisis. I feel like, we ask ourselves, "Who am I really?" Like, how do we when we go through that, like, how do we find our way how do we navigate that? Like, when we start questioning, like you were talking about, like, people not having really control uh there's just so much happening that it's very easy to question yourself and other people, and you just question everything about yourself and the people around you.
Well, it feels like there's no place where you can go where you're really grief free.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, just today,
Mhm.
um, Rob Reiner and his wife
Yes.
were
Yes.
assassinated, killed
Mhm.
by their son, apparently.
Yes.
And the
Mhm.
president of the United States managed to twist it as something that was he was a disgusting human being.
Right.
That couldn't resist the glory of the coming of the greatness of America again.
Yes. I
Good
think he
luck to
called it
them.
Trump derangement syndrome, like, he died because of
Yeah.
Trump
Oh,
derangement
just
syndrome or something
a
like that, yeah.
hateful thing. Just
Yes.
hateful thing. How do you how do we get to the graceful stuff? How do we get to the comforting stuff? How do we
Yeah.
find I mean, it's with the people that you love the most and that you're friendliest with, and so on. But then you feel, what can I do to move the world a bit in the right direction when the world doesn't seem very movable?
Mhm.
And I think it's got to be together with other people. One person alone isn't going to get too far.
Right.
But he could have
Right.
said a nicer thing when someone was assassinated.
Yes, I agree, I
He's not
agree.
the guy to expect to do that.
No, no, I would not expect anything otherwise if I'm being honest. But like is grieving a choice-filled thing though? Like for someone in the depths of grieving, right? Even though there's so many things that are out of our control, I think I've seen your writings where you have said that grieving is choice-filled. What does that mean?
Well, it's because it's active.
Mhm.
And how you turn to living in the world in the aftermath of someone's dying is full of choice.
Mhm.
Uh, I can retreat into my living room and not move anything and make sure that dinner is always set for him as well, even though he's not going to show up. And I'm going to keep all this stuff in the closet. and I'm never going to change my job, and I'm never going to make a new friend. My friends are going to be the same, and we're going to be on the same schedule, and so on. And you petrify thing that's should be life filled, and miss out. If you think of people doing that, if they ask themselves the question, "How would mom want me to be living now that she's gone? Would
Mhm.
she want me to keep all her stuff in the closet? Would she want me to not make a new friend? Would she want me to eat all the same meals and have a place for her at the table?" Nobody wants that. But if they
Right.
do, they've got a serious problem. What do they want? They want you to be you as best you can in new life circumstances. And you've been pretty good at it up to now. Please don't let my death stop you from being pretty good at it again. And remember me as often as you can. And if I've taught you some things that you appreciate, do what I taught you. If you can
Right.
learn lessons from my life where I really screwed up and be better for knowing that, well, benefit from that story. And I can feel a little bit better here in the ground, in the grave, that I made a difference in his life that's making it possible for him to live even better.
Right. Is there a timeline? Right? Because I feel like that's a
Mm.
question that probably a lot of people ask. Like, I wonder if they ask you all the time, how long is this feeling going to last? Right? Because we live in a world of Amazon Prime, right? Where we're just used to getting instant results. Everything happens pretty quickly, right?
Right.
Like in your experience, do you believe that there is a grieving timeline? Like, is there a certain amount of time that needs to go by for a person?
Not close to a timeline. I think two
Hmm.
things are true that make thinking about timelines silly.
Hmm.
One is you will never stop missing the person who died. As long my mother died in 2001. Uh, I still miss her. My father died in 1969. I still miss him. Aunts and uncles were dying all along the way. I've, I've experienced the death of a grandmother who was the only grandparent I knew, 30 aunts and uncles, and almost as many cousins, not to count colleagues and friends. I mean, by the time you get to be my age, death is part of the package. I haven't stopped missing any of them, and I haven't stopped loving any of them. If then grief is about learning to love in separation, and if when we're separated from loved ones, we miss them, we do that when they're alive. Why not do it after they've died? That's okay. As long as the hurt doesn't come to dominate your life or shape your life, and so on. If if it's as human in grieving as it is in living, to just I ask audiences when I start talking about this kind of stuff. Um, Grieving's about relearning how to live, so it's learning how to live. How many of you here in the audience, raise your hand, feel like you've finished learning how to live? How many hands go up? Nobody, ever. Why would you think relearning is going to be something you finish? I, I, it doesn't work that way, but we're made to carry a mix of emotions and dispositions and habits and ways of thinking and so on that's serve us well until people die and will serve us well after they've died. And it's getting through that transition from I feel overwhelmed, I feel stopped in my place. Um, Give yourself a break. Give yourself some time to step back, um, push away people who are expecting too much of you right now and say, look, let's get to that later, and so on. And do things small to begin with. If you can um, start that way, if there aren't immediate pressures for something heavy, and work your way into when you were a kid, you were learning to not put this in your mouth, and that this is
Hmm.
okay to eat, and so
Yes.
on,
Yes.
and you learn to walk, and you learn to touch other people without hurting them. And then
Yes.
you learn to read, and you learn to write, and you learn to roller skate, and you learn to swing a baseball bat or whatever
Mhm.
sport you're interested in. And it's slow going, and it's elementary at first. And if you watch NBA players play basketball, it's like rocket science by the time you're done. All
Mhm.
right.
Mhm.
Um, Start small in the relearning. Reshape your living room. Leave this stuff in the closet until 3 months from now, you're kind of ready to go in and look, and maybe 5 months, you'll start sorting some out, and go slow,
Yeah.
and get into the fullness of it. And it's hard to understand that in the world expects you to, oh, take a week or 10 days to come to terms with this terrible loss, and then you're back on the job, and you gotta be as good as you were when you left, and so on. The world is impatient. You need to learn to be patient with yourself, to ask other people to let you be patient with yourself, and if they just push too much, just say, "I can't do this." Some people are virtually imprisoned in the economic system and can't just walk away from some responsibilities. There's need for a lot of education
Mhm.
for bosses and the like about, and corporate heads and people who are running huge operations with a lot of people. Great tendency to just ignore the hurt,
Mhm.
and you'll be better if you take care of the hurt and give them time and patience. They'll come better. They'll come back to work grateful for the support that they had, and probably more effective than if you hammer on them and insist they do things they're not ready to do.
Do do men and women grieve differently in your experience?
I think to the extent that they live lives differently,
Mhm.
and they have different personalities, and they have different roles that they take on or are assigned, probably, but I'd be at a loss as to how to describe exactly. I've met very expressive men and expressive women, and very inexpressive men and inexpressive women. I've met very effective day-to-day livers and people who trip over themselves almost every day in some way or another. And I don't think there's wide variation, male to female, in that
Mhm.
regard. There are stereotypes, uh, and I think it's hard for men if they show themselves to be soft at a time when they're hurting. Um, that's just society being unfair to men.
Sure.
And I think, if women turn out to be very effective in putting their lives back together, and their egos work very well, and they underexpress themselves and so on, that's not a failing on their part. That's the way they happen to be.
Mhm.
And I think the variations are pretty similar. When I started teaching, I did something that your viewers are going to think, oh, how did he do that? I started teaching a course on philosophy of feminism. Why would I do that?
Really?
Why would
Interesting.
I do that? Well, my wife was a woman, as I recall, and my two first children were daughters. And I thought, the world doesn't treat these people very well. I'm going to
Mhm.
teach about it because I can't find anybody else who's ready to teach it. The first article I ever published was called "Why Are You a Man Teaching This Course on the Philosophy of Feminism?" And we had interesting conversations, but the bottom line of it was, if you women who are challenging me really want to draw the line at, I'm a woman, you cannot understand me, then all of your protesting and so on is going to fall on deaf ears of men who you want to understand you. You want me to understand you. All
Mhm.
right. And I'm doing the best that I can. And I wish more women or more men were doing that.
Mhm.
Uh, anyway, that's
Yeah.
me. I'm kind of a goofy guy.
No, we're recording this in the same week that Dick Clark celebrated his 100th birthday.
No,
Yeah, he turned 100 this
not,
week, the week that
it's
we're
not Dick
recording.
Clark. It's somebody else.
Oh, not Dick Clark. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Oh my God. Dick Clark died many years ago. Oh my God, from Mary Poppins.
yeah, yeah.
Dick
Dick
Van Dyke. Dick Van Dyke.
Dick
There we
Van
go.
Dyke. Yeah, all
Woo!
right. Just turned 100. Okay,
Yeah.
you can scratch that out of your film.
You know, I always love to keep that stuff in because I love when people see that I'm not perfect.
Uh,
Yeah. So Dick, we're recording
he
this on
said
the week
100
that Dick
years is
Van
not
Dyke.
enough.
Yeah. Yes. And one of the things that he said that I'm glad that I get to talk to you this week about this is he was saying how he's not really afraid of death anymore.
Uh-huh.
Do you get a chance to, like, I know you talk to a lot of people that are grieving, but do you also get a chance to talk to the people that know that, like, there's not much time left? And is that a common ideology that they have if they've lived a good life, like they're just not afraid of death anymore? Is that common?
We have older friends. I'm among the older. All right. Um, just in the last couple of weekends, we had people over and you just talk at lunch and we go for like 3 hours. And there's one fellow who's getting ready for what they call in Canada MAID, medical assistance in dying. And
Mm,
he's aware that he's losing his mental capacities and he does not want to end his life in misery around that. His physical capacities have been compromised. He doesn't golf anymore. He's not as good as he was in conversation and so on. And the four of us who were there together just talked with him and acknowledged that it's possible to get to a point in life where it's enough, or I'm ready to go. I've had plenty, and what's ahead doesn't look so good. Um, and lately, in other conversations, similarly, elders sitting and talking together, there's a lot of less severe talk about, I've had it because it's kind of crummy and it's getting crummier and I don't want to keep going. But it's more of, I've had a really good life. There have been challenges and so on. But um, if I had to die today, I think on the way out, I'd say, it's been good. You know?
mhm,
And that's kind of the way I feel talking to you
mhm.
right now. Um, I'd be happy. Well, I'd be happy up to a point going where Dick Van Dyke is, 100.
Yes,
But
yes,
part
yeah.
of what would be hard for me is typically in those later years, a higher percentage of the people you've known and been close to, they keep dying.
Mhm,
And, that flood kind of started with me as that very young boy, and so many aunts and uncles and so on. And usually we write a Christmas letter and we kind of remember who died during the year. And some of those years have been pretty horrific. Um, and I've seen videos of people, say, in their mid to late 90s, interviewed, and they ask them, what's the most difficult thing about being your age? And the answer is typically, there's no one to remember with.
mm,
And that I don't want to get to that place. And what some people recommend for people who are getting old is get some young friends. Right now, people who are young friends are in later decades than you would have ever thought that that's where you would look for young people. All
mhm.
right.
Yeah, yeah,
I would not want to be 100 and alone,
mhm,
but I don't think you have to be.
yeah. Yeah. I've been grilling you for 57 minutes now, but I one thing that I like to do is a thing called reverse the mic, and it's a special segment for all of my Patreon subscribers where I turn the mic over to you and you can ask me anything that you want. And I have to answer it. So for everybody that's watching or listening, I don't know what he's going to ask, and like it's one of those things where he puts me on the spot, and I answer it, and I love that feeling. So Tom, I turn it over to you. I'm reversing the mic. What question or
Well, the
questions do you
first
have for
question
me?
that
For
comes out,
anybody that's For anybody that's watching or listening right now that is loving this conversation and wants to learn more, I mentioned this in the beginning. Tom has a book, and it's available. By the time this airs, it's going to be available. It's called Seeking Wisdom in Death's Shadows. I'm going to include the link to that in the notes of this podcast. So all you have to do is click and read about it, read more about it. All of the things that you need to know about Tom and the book, it's all going to be in the link. So all you have to do is click and it'll be there. Because I think this conversation, while it's a tough conversation to have, it's a needed conversation to have. And I hope that the people listening were able to get maybe even some validity about their grieving process, or maybe some insight into the grieving process, and all of those things. So, Tom, I appreciate very, very much your insight and knowledge here. And I have one more question for you. This is I ask all of my guests this at the end. Um, if there's one thing, like if you want somebody to forget everything we talked about today, except for one thing, what is one thing you want them to carry on from this episode, from this talk today?
Because grieving is about relearning how to live in the world, every lesson you have learned up to now about how to live in the world applies. You are equipped to do what grieving is asking you to do. There's a fog of pain and sorrow that stops you and daunts you. When you're ready to reach beyond it, you'd be amazed, but you already know about what you need to do in order to get back to living well and loving in separation while you're at it.
I love that. I love that. My guest today, Tom Attig. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Tom, thank you so much. I mean that. Thank you. I love this conversation.
Thank you.
I got to be honest with you. I needed that conversation. The way that Tom distinguishes between passive sadness and active grieving, that just clicks something into place for me. The idea that we don't have to move on, it implies that we had to leave people behind, but learning how to love in separation, that means we get to carry them with us. And that is some powerful stuff. A huge thank you to Thomas Attig for his wisdom and his kindness. Please, my friends, go check out his new book, Seeking Wisdom in Death's Shadows. I have put all of the links to his book right in the show notes. And again, a massive thank you to our presenting sponsor, Sucre Bay. Do yourself a favor and go grab a bottle of my fragrance with them. Why did I walk into this room? It is a gender-neutral love letter to the ADHD community that you didn't know that you needed. So go check them out at sucrebay.com. And if you are looking for more support, I encourage you to head over to thevibewithkai.com. There is so much free content there for you. We have a full ADHD blog. We have the entire podcast archive, and you can sign up for my email list so we can always stay connected. And that's the best place to start. And if you want to go deeper, come join the subscriber family on Patreon or Facebook. For just $5 a month, you get access to that exclusive Reverse the Mic segment that wasn't in this episode, but it's there for my subscribers right now, where Tom, he puts me in the hot seat. Plus, you get access to my ADHD deep dive video library. And at the end of the day, it's the best way to support me. It's the best way to support the show and support your own mental health journey along the way. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a solid and hit that subscribe button, leave a review, and share this with a friend or family member who might need to hear it. It really does help the podcast grow. Once again, thank you for watching and for listening. As always, my friends, much love, good vibes. I'll catch you next time. Bye.